we're going to hear this talk today with live, so I'm going to ask Dave Chiswell to come up. He's not normally here on this campus, so thank you, Dave, for coming to be. Don't even go here. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. Now, I've got a few questions to ask you.
Sure.
Here they are. Ready? So we can get to know you.
All right.
Dave Chiswell, what's your favourite colour?
Red.
Sport?
Golf.
TV show?
Westwood.
Thoughtful. Letter? Does that reflect your university education?
D for Deacon.
Oh, D for distinction, actually. Yeah. Okay. Wife?
Alexi.
University?
Deacon.
Biggest regret?
My biggest regret was when I proposed. So I'm married to Alexi, and when I proposed to Alexi, I had this great idea. We go back to the park where we had our first date. We had this romantic hour by a lake on a nice little spot. And that was the first day. I thought we'll go back there, and that's where I'll put the question. And I forgot to go to the park and check where the spot was. And so we went on this super date the day we were going to get engaged, and then we got to the park and I got us lost. And it was getting dark, and so we kind of walked around for a bit. We got to the road, that can't be it, so we turned around. So we walked around for about 20 minutes, and I was just freaking out. And we could kind of see the water in the distance, and we just, it's dark, this will do. Lexi, will you marry me? What happened? So that's probably something I do differently. I got another shot.
Did she know the whole time that you were looking for the proposal spot? Or?
She worked it out. Yeah.
Dang.
So that was it.
Well, that's a good regret story, but of course I asked you that question because I assumed your biggest regret would be not having come to Monash University.
Not having, yeah, I didn't get in. That's just what happened. Yeah.
Oh dear. Now, moving on. In a sentence, why do you follow Jesus?
I follow Jesus because the Christian account of the world makes more sense and offers more hope than anything else.
Right. And you can explore that a bit now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks for coming, and I'll hand over to you.
How you going? Awkwardly silent. Yeah, my name's Dave. I'm a ministry apprentice over at Deakin University, and I should clarify something. Deakin is my favourite university, but I don't think it's the best university. I need to be upfront about that. I think we look at Monash with a little bit of respect and awe, and maybe a touch of jealousy thrown in as well. I'm married, a Monash student, and the general consensus at my university is that I'm married up. So that's we had someone from Melbourne University come to us a couple of weeks ago actually and say, they made some sort of joke about how they'd come to speak to the opposition, and we were just chuffed with that. We thought, I cannot believe they consider us opposition. We didn't think we were playing in the same sport, let alone in the same league. But apparently we're the enemy, so that was nice for us, but I want to say thanks for having me. Even though I am from Deakin, that was very humble and gracious of you, and I'm glad to be here. We have been looking over the past few weeks at how to beat life. How to beat life. It's a big and kind of fun question. And the first talk I heard at least was about winning friends, how you might win friends, and then the next one was winning strategies for life. How might you win as you live? But this week our question is a little bit bigger and maybe a little bit more final than that. How do you ultimately win life? How do you get to the end and say you've won? How do you pass the final test? How do you win in death? Now this is a very relevant topic for all of us. The most conservative estimates I could find suggest that 100% of people die. the kind of statistics we like over at Deakin, the nice and easy ones. Everybody dies. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you eat, who you vote for, what university you studied at, everybody dies. And so there's a certain certainty about death. It happens to everybody. But at the same time, There's a real uncertainty about death, isn't there? You don't know when. You probably don't know how. Whether it sneaks up on you, all of a sudden, a car crash, or the slow creeping of a cancer. There's a real uncertainty about death. So I think that makes our question today pretty vital. Given the certain uncertainty of death, how do we make sure it goes well for us? How do you get to the end and say you had a good result? Well, we're going to pray some and then open the Bible. Let me pray. God, thank you that you have spoken to us. Please, would you speak through me now? Would you use our time to comfort those of us who are disturbed? Would you disturb those of us who are just too comfortable? And we pray we'd see the glory of Jesus. Amen. As you walked in, hopefully you got one of these handouts. That'll be helpful. There's lots of empty space on there. You can take notes. But in there is a passage, and we're going to look at this passage and try and answer our question. It's a little bit of a weird way of going about it, because actually the passage says very, very little about death. But I do think it'll be helpful. So let me read it out. It's a passage from Colossians chapter 1. And Colossians is a letter written from a man named Paul, who was transformed by Jesus and then planted a number of churches. He writes to one of his churches these words. He's talking about Jesus here. He says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he's now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister." Now, before I worked for the CU at Deakin University, I studied there, and I did an undergraduate degree in philosophy, which is why I get to wear this slightly pretentious jacket. It's been my experience in philosophy, as well as pretentious jackets like this, that actually there's one way to do well. You may not get PhDs, but it's a certain credit on almost every assignment if you just follow this simple little tip, and that is this: avoid answering the question at all costs. Do not answer a question if you can avoid it. Now, philosophers leave the work of answering questions to law students. The job of a philosophy student is just to question the question. All we set out to do is find a way to reject the premise behind the question, and if you can do that, you'll actually do pretty well in an essay. For example, if someone comes up to you on the street and says, "How are you?" I said, "Well, how would I know how I am?" Now, I should say, this worked in the philosophy department at Deakin, but it may not work at Monash. I don't know what the department's like, so ask a professional before you try it. But I bring that up because when it comes to our question today, how can we make sure death goes well for us? I think our passage requires us to reject the premise of the question. I think our passage requires us to reject the premise that the final result, the measure of success in life and death, is primarily about you. Our passage requires us to move away from a selfish and egocentric concept of our existence. But before we can even start to attempt an answer to this question, we need to acknowledge plainly and simply, it's not about us. It's about him. It's about Jesus. Let me show you what I mean. Look at verse 16. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, or rulers, or authority. For by him all things were created. If you're familiar with the Bible, you'll be familiar with the start of it. Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He formed the world with his word. He spoke and there was light. He said something and stars entered the sky that he also spoke into existence. God created the animals of the sea and the land and the air. He created people, and when God was done, it was good. God created. But this passage tells us that when God created, Jesus was there. Which means you can't fall into the trap of categorizing Jesus as a created being. You can't pigeonhole Jesus into creation. He was before all things, verse 17. Jesus was there at the beginning of everything. And in fact, Jesus was somehow involved in the beginning of everything. An active agent in creation. Through him, all things were created. Now let me be very clear, I'm not trying to make any claims about the process of creation. Whether it's 6 days or 6 billion years, that's another conversation for another time. I'm sure there's people here who'd be happy to talk to you about that. But what I am saying is that behind whatever process took place was a person. Behind whatever process took place at the beginning of everything, there was a person. This passage goes even further again. Because not only is Jesus the person behind the process, Jesus is the purpose behind the creation of everything. Look again at verse 16. Did you catch it? For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. All things were created for him. Everything that has ever been made has been made by Jesus and for Jesus. The purpose of everything that exists is found in Jesus. We recently at Deacon had a mission similar to this one, and the people in our Christian Union went around campus asking, who or what do you live for? Essentially, we're just asking random strangers, why do you exist? What's the point of you being? We had all sorts of answers. We had people living for family or success or career or joy or their friends or their pursuit of knowledge. But as we kind of reflected on it, we thought this is not a very fair question. Because actually there's only one answer. We're asking people to give all sorts of answers, but there's one answer for everybody on our campus and everybody on your campus too. The reason you exist is Jesus. It's in Jesus that everything, including you, finds its origin and its purpose. Jesus gives everything life and meaning. You start to see now how it might not be about you. It's about him. And it's only now that we can start to approach our question. How might we win in death? Because now we start to see that if our lives are going to be truly successful, worth anything, if we're going to win this thing, it's got to have something to do with Jesus. Now, think about football. When you get to the final siren, how do you know who's won? The scoreboard will tell you. Who had the most points? That's how you know. And for that reason, the Sydney Swans are on top of the ladder. But if football was actually defined in terms of how many tackles you had, or how many punches you threw, or how few teeth you had between the 22 guys on your team, then I suspect there'd be a a certain black and white team that is far more successful. The way you know how you win is by working out what happens at the end. The points define who the winner is. And so it is with Jesus. The question of existence, what it means to be human successfully, is defined by Jesus. If you want to know how to live in this world well, you need to begin and end with Jesus. One theologian, J.I. Packer, puts it this way in his book, Knowing God. Knowing about God is crucially important for the living of our lives. And it would be cruel to an Amazonian tribesman to fly him to London and put him down without explanation in Trafalgar Square and leave him, as one who knew nothing of English or England. So it would be cruel to ourselves if we try to live in this world without knowing about the God whose world it is and who runs it. The world is from Jesus, the world is for Jesus, and we are cruel to ourselves if we deny that. Your success or failure in this life, your winning or your losing, is all in relation to you. I wonder if you're anything like me, whether or not you react against that somehow. That's just not quite comfortable for you. But I think our reaction against Jesus at the centre of all things starts to explain why death is actually a certainty for all of us. See, we say things like, we want to be free. We want to be truly free. I want to find my own meaning. I want to find my own meaning apart from Jesus. But that's a bit like a fish who wants to be free from water. When a fish is liberated from the fish bowl to lie on the carpet, it doesn't go well. And so it is with us. We say we want freedom, but really we reject the very one who gives us life. Humanity knows God, but refuses to acknowledge him as God. We start to think that actually we know better, that we might somehow be more qualified to write an instruction manual on life. We might decide to make our own rules and find our own meaning and purpose and value. We decide we want to go our own way, separate from God. But by wanting to be separate from God, we find ourselves separated from God. Cast out of his presence, sent away. But verse 21 in the passage puts it this way, and you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. We turned against the one who made us. We become God's enemies, alienated from him, hostile towards him. We sinned. The Bible is very clear. Our rejection of God is punishable by death. The price for our rebellion is death. It's not that every bad thing you do just needs to be met with a good thing and then we'll call it square. The wages of sin is death. And you cut yourself off from the one who gave you life. Death is the natural conclusion. Now God could have just left us to that. He could have stayed separated from us. He doesn't need us. He was before all things. He created all things. He could have just created again. But God did something extraordinary. In Jesus, God became a man, a human being. The invisible God became visible. Verse 15. Verse 19, that the fullness of God dwelled in Jesus. God came to earth, stepped into the stage of human history in Jesus. Can you imagine the fullness of the invisible God, the one who created all things, in a baby? Like, how would all the majesty and the glory fit? Just think about the fact that there was a moment in time and space when you could have held God in your hands. And if you weren't careful, he would have vomited on you. This is an outrageous, incredible thing to do. It's what we call the incarnation. Now, if you have a carnivore, it's someone who eats meat. And so God incarnate is God with meat on. That's what it means. God took on flesh, became a human, and it gets even better than that. I have a friend who's a dad, and one time his child did something pretty wrong, an offence punishable by time out in his room. But what this dad decided to do was tell his son had done something wrong, and then he did the most radical thing. He said, "Son, what you've done is bad. You should go to your room for 15 minutes, but here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go to your room for you. You keep playing with your trains. I'll go sit in your room." It's a bit like what Jesus has done for us. He came as a man and then suffered our punishment. The punishment that we deserved. Verse 21, "Once you were alienated and hostile in your minds because of your evil actions, but now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him." Jesus died for us in his flesh on the cross. He died for us, his enemies, and reconciled us to God. He offered us a new and perfect and eternal relationship with him. And in doing so, defeated the problem of death. The problem of our separation from God. Jesus became the solution to the final hurdle. Now those who believe in him have nothing to fear from death. I wonder if you've been to a Christian funeral. There are often times of great sadness, but there are always times of great joy. Because we farewell one of our brothers or sisters and we say, "We will miss you, but only for a time. We will miss you, but we will meet again. Because you're in Jesus." The Christian hope is one that tackles the problem of death, that offers new life beyond death, new and perfect life beyond death. So the obvious question is, how can we be sure? How can we be sure that that's really what's on the table? I mean, if death is a certainty for everybody, what makes Jesus' death any different? How do we know his death achieved anything? Well, it's because he didn't stay dead. Jesus rose from the dead. Look at verse 18, two little sentences. He is the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead. The central claim at the heart of Christianity is that Jesus rose from the dead, bodily, physically. And Jesus' resurrection changed everything. It's a bit like a firework. When you light the fuse of a firework, you've only got a few seconds before it blows up into this beautiful explosion of light and sound and colour. Now, I have a friend who used to play with fireworks, and for the sake of anonymity, we'll call him Graham Chiswell. One time he was playing with fireworks and he forgot to throw the firework. And he learned the hard way that once you light the fuse of a firework, there's not much you can do to stop it exploding. Jesus' resurrection has lit the fuse of the new creation. It's how we know that there's new life after death, because Jesus is living it now. We're just waiting for the beautiful explosion of life and sound and colour. It's the sure sign that he has really reconciled us to God, because he died for death and then rose again. It's the sure sign that one day everything will be made right, because he is the King. It's the sure sign that Jesus really was who he claimed to be. So is there an afterlife? Yes. How can you make sure it goes well for you? It's quite simple, really. By believing in the death and resurrection of Jesus. The Christian view of life starts and ends with Jesus, the Christian solution to death likewise. But the Christian claim is that this is not just for Christians to know about. The fact that Jesus offers life, that we were once hostile to God and can now be reconciled, applies to everyone. At the end of a sermon, normally what will happen is the preacher, that's me, will say some things of application, some ideas, what you can go and do in the real world, how you can get your hands dirty with this stuff. And I'd like to do the opposite, if that's all right. I'd like to tell you two things that you cannot possibly do in light of this. The first one is that you cannot possibly treat Jesus as unnecessary. You cannot possibly think that you don't need Jesus. He is not some sort of Nigerian prince with an investment opportunity. Jesus claims to be at the centre of everything, and the Bible claims that you're his enemy, and he's offered to reconcile you. You will not be okay without Jesus. You can't treat Jesus as unnecessary. And you can't treat Jesus as unknowable either. One of the beautiful things about God stepping into time is that now we have a falsifiable religion in Christianity. When I say Jesus rose from the dead, I'm not talking about a random spiritual idea. I'm talking about a real historical event that you can look up for yourself. You can check it out, you can make your own decisions. Christianity is something that is falsifiable. And God has made himself known, so now you can check it out for yourself. Now I want to ask you to do me a favour. If you can falsify this, please do it. Please let me know. I just don't get paid enough to do this job, to be a Christian when there is no risen Christ. I only have a philosophy degree from Deacon, so I don't know what else I'll do. But I know I won't do this. You can prove the resurrection of Jesus wrong, then I'm out, and you should be too. But you can know, you can investigate. But if this is not false, if this is true, then it makes all the difference in the world. It makes all the difference in the world. Because the offer on the table is freedom from death. This is how you beat life. You know Jesus. There's a famous old story when slavery was rampant in the US. A young girl was being sold in the markets. And this man came up and bought the young girl. He paid whatever it cost to obtain this young girl. And then he said to the girl, you're free to go. You're free to go? She said, what do you mean? Like, I'm free to be whoever I want. Yeah. You're free to be whoever you want. I'm free to say whatever I want. Yeah, you're free to say whatever you want. I'm free to do whatever I want. Yes. I'm free to go wherever I want. Yes. I'm free to go wherever you want. So the little girl looked up at the man and said, then I will go with you, for with you I am free. The offer on the table is freedom from death. A free, eternal, perfect life with the one who created everything and is at the centre of it all. So please do one thing for me. Please make an informed decision about this. Just investigate. Look into it. Make up your mind. I can't make up your mind for you, but you can look at this. And we'd love to help you do that. Let's see. So we've got a video. It's going to come up on the screen. And then Stuart will do some information about that.
saying goes, it's not what you know, but who you know. We might know something about God, but how can we actually know God? The Introducing God course is relaxed and friendly over a meal or a coffee. On it, we are introduced to the God of the Bible. Because to get to know someone, you have to meet them first.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for coming. And I do urge you from here to go and investigate and talk more about it. As I was promoting this series of talks yesterday in the campus centre, a female stopped me and said, I've got one question for you. How can you tell us how to beat life when you haven't done it yourself? And I said, yeah, that's a good question. And before I could say any more, she walked off, victory in hand. So I lost that one. But I wanted to say to her, though, it's not about us telling you how to beat life from our wisdom and our observations and our research. What we're talking about is having met a person. We want to talk about being life. Having met the Lord Jesus Christ, this person that Christians go on about. We think he changes everything, and because we know about him and know him, we are convinced there is a way to win in life. There is a way to live well, to know God, even to live forever. So it's amazing hope and promise that Christianity offers that is worth looking into. So yeah, please get along to this course, Introducing God. It's actually the details of the when and where is on the back of your handout. It's on this evening, and it's in the Menzies building, room W220. It's on at 5 p.m. and it comes with a dinner as well. And it's just a great time. You just hang out and talk and chat as that video is conveyed. But there's more things you can do. Of course, you can just hang around with us now. We're going to have some drinks and food in the narthex room just up at the front there. So please keep chatting with us, talk to the people around about you, or perhaps the person who brought you along today. And you can also check out websites. On the back of this handout, there are also websites that you can look up to investigate Christianity further. And of course, you can come back here next week when we're starting a new series in the same kind of vein called Crack House Philosophy, which is a lot of fun. What we do is we go around campus discreetly taking photos of graffiti that we find on the inside of toilet cubicles. And we respond to it because you get some really deep philosophy in the toilets at Monash. And we're going to respond efficiently to some of the views expressed there. So it's really good fun and it's interesting. So please come along next week as we look into Christ more. Hope to see you then.